What is the secret to being truly productive and building a meaningful, lasting career? As a seasoned productivity consultant who has trained thousands of people, let me give you a surprising but counterintuitive truth. The answer depends on your age. In your 20s and 30s, it's all about saying yes. Dive into new experiences, forge new relationships, and build valuable skills for the future. This is your time to experiment wildly, to take risks and set the stage for your career. But don't get stuck in this mode, because the habits and practices that set you up for success early in life will actually hinder you if you don't unlearn them as you age. And that's hard to do, because as you approach your 40s and 50s, most of us feel overwhelmed by how much we have on our plate. At work, there are endless tasks and meetings and emails. And at home, there's often children and financial pressures and concern for aging parents. And at some point, you need to become selective in what you say yes to. You can't do everything. It becomes increasingly important to be selective. That is, to make space. Rather than saying yes to everything, you need to pivot to saying no more often, sharpening your focus and refining your priorities to focus on a few things that truly count. So, join us for this episode of the Space Makers podcast, where we're going to talk about how to unlearn outdated habits and build new strategies to live a meaningful, purpose-filled life. Matt and I will explore the science of productivity across the stages of life and how to make space for what truly matters. Okay, let's get started. Hey, welcome back everyone to the Space Makers, a podcast where we talk about how to make space for a meaningful, intentional life. And I'm here with my good friend and co-host, Matt Bain.
Hi, Dan. Hi, everyone.
Great. And we are here talking about a big idea for season 2. We're talking about how to make space for life's inevitable resets. The idea that the types of habits and practices that set us up for success in our 20s and 30s are actually the ones we need to intentionally undo and rethink in order to live a more productive life when we're older. And this particular episode is about productivity. We're going to talk about what it might look like to be productive through the different stages of life, and again, how we need to undo particular habits in order to be productive through midlife.
It's a big one. It's a big topic for this
It's
series.
another big topic. Yeah, we talked about happiness last time, but this is another one.
Yes.
So I was thinking about a conversation I had last week. So I have a productivity masterclass, which I run year on year with a few groups of 6 leaders. And so we meet for just over an hour every fortnight. And over 6 months, we go through basically my full productivity suite of frameworks. The idea isn't just to talk about information, it's to set people up with a set of habits that they can live out from week in, week out after that. But I always love this class because I learn from all these intelligent, creative leaders from different professions, and I learn stuff myself. And one of them said a comment that I thought was very relevant to this podcast, and I learned something from it. She said, the challenge for me is that I'm not just learning new habits, but I'm unlearning old ones, and that's harder.
Yes, yes.
And I thought that was really profound, because it's one thing to get information. It's even one thing to reflect on that information and to try to learn new productivity habits, particularly in your midlife or when you're leading organizations. But it's another thing to unlearn old habits in order to learn new ones. And that's actually the process I take people on in Productivity Masterclass. But I think that's the process that we all have to journey along as we move from our 20s and 30s to our later life.
Yeah, that's good. That's almost exactly what my banjo teacher said to me in the first lesson when he asked, have you ever played banjo before? I said, no. And he said, that's a good thing. There's nothing to unlearn.
Oh, excellent. That's great. It's like when I was a physiotherapist in rehab and I was
this
doing
isn't a competition, mate.
Oh, well, it is. There's always a competition. And I was doing hands rehab.
Yeah.
And some guy said, do you think this will mean I can play the piano again once I get better? And I said, no, you'll be fine. Give him a few months. And then he smart ass replied that he didn't know how to play the piano.
When I was a little boy, I dreamt of being like a rock star. I think you may be one of the few people I know who dreamt of being able to say, My productivity suite, having your own productivity suite when you grew up, that was a great.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. You know, who wants to be a fireman when they grow up?
My
So
own productivity suite.
we're talking about unlearning habits. And I think that's a key part of what it means to be productive through the landscape of life. When I think about unlearning habits, I actually think about something that I unlearned when I was young. So I used to play water polo, and I used to think I was pretty good at swimming. I was smart at reading the play. I was fairly good at, you know, let's say ball skills and knowing how to shoot. But when I hit university, not only am I not kind of big enough for water polo, but I just couldn't keep up with the pace. And it doesn't matter how good you are with ball skills and how smart you are, you actually have to be able to swim as fast as everyone else. And it wasn't just fitness. No matter how much I swam, I just couldn't quite keep up because I'd never done squad swimming. I hadn't actually learned to swim fast. And then when I became a physiotherapist, I ended up with this great group of people, and we used to swim at the hydrotherapy pool in my rehab hospital. We used to swim like Tuesdays and Thursdays, and there were a whole heap of great swimmers. And someone once said to me, you know, Dan, you actually don't know how to swim. Can I teach you? Which is a little bit offensive when you played water polo for quite a few years. But honestly, she was completely right. I actually didn't know how to swim. Meaning, when you swim freestyle, your power comes by rotating your body almost 180 degrees through the water, and you stretch out and you pull in the stroke, but it's through the rotation of the body. Whereas I used to just swim with my body flat and just splash my arms wildly in the air.
Flail with style.
Exactly. It was fine when I was just swimming in school, but I had to unlearn that. And what was super hard is she basically made me stop swimming quickly, and I had to literally go back all the way to like A, B, C, D, so I could learn how to swim again. And it felt unnatural. It was weird. But after about 6 months, it became a new habit. And I was swimming much faster than I ever swam before, realizing that I had to put in a lot less effort to get a lot faster. And so I think that's the process of unlearning in order to learn something new. And I think that describes exactly what we're talking about in terms of the midlife squeeze and how to reshape what it means to get the right things done.
Yeah, that's great.
So you and I have talked about how would we describe that overarching shift from being productive and successful when we're young to reshaping and relearning productivity when we're older. And it's essentially about going from saying yes to everything to start saying no to a lot more, to be more selective.
Yeah, maybe even no to most things.
No to most things, yeah. That when you're young, it's great advice to say yes to most things. And then eventually it becomes wise to say no to most things. And that shift is quite dramatic and difficult for many of us to achieve.
Yeah.
It's unlearning the way you used to do things.
We've heard on plenty of American podcasts, probably, and American authors like use that baseball analogy, right? So swing at everything when you're young. And then when you're older, be a lot more selective.
Yeah, doesn't quite work with a cricket bat, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Wildly
It
sweeping
doesn't.
around.
But the thing that I really like about that analogy is that swinging after a while at everything else becomes instinctive.
Yeah, okay.
So you're almost able to unlearn. What we're talking about is unlearning something that's instinctual.
At the start, you literally swing,
Yeah.
and then you tidy it up. Yeah,
yes.
that makes sense. So we're going to go into detail about this stuff, but why don't we pause and feedback on the activity from last time?
So we asked people again in their 20s and 30s, so that stage of life, to take what we kind of conceptualize as a preventative measure. Yeah. And that is, again, find one or two people in your life, again, who you think are at risk of being neglected, or perhaps kind of just dropping off your kind of social calendar, and you value them. So the call was book something in with them, like a regular fortnightly, monthly, quarterly activity that involves some face-to-face interaction, and be intentional about that. So use our action triggers, those cues. So, time, place, and have a good plan as to how you're going to do it, but then put it in your calendar. Contact them and put it in your calendar. Make sure it's regular. It's a pattern.
Yeah, that's the key. Make it a pattern. Don't just assume that friendship will happen by being spontaneous, particularly as you kind of get busy with life and family.
Yeah.
Create a rhythm, even if it's an occasional rhythm, even quarterly. You know, if you catch up with someone 4 times a year and have a really meaningful conversation, a beer, a meal, or a bushwalk, it'll actually significantly increase your relationships, as opposed to hoping you'll catch up
Yes.
every 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay, so that was for younger
20s to
people
30s,
or for
yes.
anyone who feels like they need to do it. And the other thing is that if you're in your 40s or 50s or 60s and you feel like you've already kind of neglected friends,
And I reckon that's 99.9% of us
I think
in that age.
99.2%, I would say.
Okay,
Be more accurate,
99.2.
Matt. We suggested that we lower the bar
Mhm.
and don't necessarily start with a rhythm, although I think that is the solution. And we're going to talk about that more in the friendship episode.
Mm.
But just start by reaching out to someone who's on your mind
Yes.
and actually reconnect in some way.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, so start off easy, as in text or phone.
Yep.
But then book just one face-to-face meeting or interaction in. Yeah,
So how
yeah.
did you go with that activity?
Yeah. So at this stage of my life, I just don't have that much capacity for the next my short/medium term horizon for spontaneous events. And I've got like a whole crew of old friends who I love to see. We've got a great history. Realistically, I just don't have very much opportunity to spontaneously see them. So I've worked out a rhythm. So we're going to be looking at booking something in like a restaurant meal, effectively, like same time every month for the remainder of the year, starting next month. So I just sent out a group text saying, "Hey, everyone, it'd be great to see you. This particular restaurant, this particular time, and I'm going to try to keep it on this pattern for the remainder of the year."
That sounds good.
Yeah, how about you?
So, okay, I'm a geek. I'm a productivity guy, right? So I thought, how would I approach this? Using my strengths, we'll call them strengths, although they're really neuroticisms. And
Reframe, it's a good start.
I've created a current and future state of friendship.
Yeah.
So, because I like that research that the quality of your friendships at the age of 50 is one of the key determinants of the quality of your life and how long you live when you're 80, right? Which I think is really profound. And I'm only a few years away from 50. So I figured if my current state is, I've got old friends, lots of people I care about, but honestly, I've been so busy, I have not had the types of community and relationship that I had even 3 or 4 years ago pre-COVID.
Yeah.
I think I lost some of my social muscles actually by going into isolation. I've never quite gotten it back. So I wrote down a bunch of people who are already close, but I want to spend more time regularly with. And I wrote a few people down, names of people who I like, who I reckon we could grow in friendship. I'd like to spend more of my life with these people. They're kind of in my future state. I won't tell them that. But if you're listening to the podcast and I've given you a phone call, you can guess what list you're on. But anyway, the point is I want to start actively pursuing a coffee with someone, once a month. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's 12 coffees with 12 different people or 10 different people.
Yes.
And then I suppose by that I'm hoping I'll rebuild my social muscles and therefore have more capacity to actually extend those relationships. So I look back in 3 years and it's like, oh yeah, this made a difference.
But and now you've kind of committed to it. And
I'm just letting you know we won't be catching up again.
That's it. Well, that's okay. It saves me from telling you that I won't be seeing you at dinner. So,
all right. So let's look at our framework. I mean, you and I are in the business of productivity coaching, training, consulting. So we've worked with thousands of different people over the years. Obviously, read a stack of stuff on productivity. When we talk about how would we put productivity as a framework into this idea that life changes in your 20s and 30s to 40s, 50s, 60s, the one thing we would suggest that needs to change is what we say yes to and what we say no or not yet to. So why don't we talk about the 20s and 30s, the stage of life which we called early adulthood, and then compare the types of wise advice for productivity that you would give for someone in that age group compared to someone later in life. Look, so when I was young, someone once said to me, just give everything a go. They didn't say yes to everything, but the premise was you're young, you've got no responsibilities, you've got a bit of disposable income, you've got heaps of energy, just do stuff, travel the world, build relationships, don't be so worried about trying new career options, turn up, give stuff your best, expand your horizons, but essentially say yes to a lot. Now, you and I have talked about the analogy of swing at everything, and I think that's actually commonly good advice. So I think if someone in their 20s was to come to me and say, what's some great advice about setting up a great career, part of what I would say is try lots of stuff. Say yes to a lot of things and build valuable skills and experiences along the way.
Yeah, so get a lot of stuff done.
Get a lot of stuff done.
A wide spread of a lot of stuff,
Yeah, which makes a lot of sense, right? You've got the energy.
Yeah.
And you don't actually really know your strengths. You don't really know what your set of passions will be. So basically get on with stuff and get things moving.
The only thing that I'd add is that commonly, typically, not always, but typically in that stage of life,
Mm.
you just haven't got the same amount of responsibilities and dependence that you may have later on.
A lot of people I coach are genuinely thinking about a career stage
Mhm.
in their late 40s, early 50s,
Mm.
but it's a lot riskier, particularly if you haven't done that
Yes.
a number of times
Mhm.
the decades before. Whereas it's really not that risky to risk everything when you're 20. Like if you lose it all at 22,
Mhm.
start again. Do you know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like it still feels risky, but it's a different layer of risk. And
Yeah.
so that's the time you want to start
Mm.
building up your risk muscles.
Just on that, and super quick, there's a guy called Kevin Kelly who wrote this book. One of his bits of like sage wisdom was the advice that I give to a young person now is basically live in your car for like a year or a 1-bedroom like apartment and really eat nothing but rice for a year, right? So after you've done that, you will always have a good idea of what like worst case scenario is.
When you're young, try lots of stuff. Say yes to stuff, build skills, and that's what it means to be productive. Then you hit your 40s, 50s, your midlife squeeze, and I would say you have to start to unlearn everything, just like I had to unlearn how to swim in order to swim differently. There are two particular things we want to dive into a bit more because they set the foundation for why you need to do things differently when you get older. The first one we'll talk about is developing basic systems, and the second one we'll talk about later is the different types of intelligence that happen over age. Yeah. So in terms of the first thing you and I would say is when you're in your 20s and 30s, while you want to say yes to a lot of stuff, you still need to build basic productivity systems. And what I mean by that is you really do need to put into practice some overarching methodology and set of skills to achieve stuff. Because yes, you've got the energy, you can push on, you can work your guts out and get stuff done through brute force. And that can work for a while, but it'll stop working very quickly once you hit your midlife. And so you might as well start to build a container for yourself in terms of productivity that you can build on and shape later on. What I mean by that is put it all together as a system, and then that foundation will allow you to launch into whatever area of life you want to extend into without being bogged down constantly by the fact that you don't have basic organizational systems at a professional level. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. That's great. Yeah. So basically, like that foundation that you're building, putting those tracks in is going to serve you for a long time.
Absolutely.
I like it, Dan. It's like you're future proofing to some degree, and you're being kinder to your future self. So get that stuff again squared away in the 20s and 30s.
So that's the first thing. The second thing is about recognizing the change that will happen in your intelligence.
The big message is, whilst we're talking about a change, we're talking about a change that will lead from having particular strengths because of our physiology in the first, again, 20s and 30s, to having a different kind of strength in our, 40s onwards. The majority of great scientific discoveries, and I'm talking about stuff that has been rewarded with things like Nobel Prizes, and they come from people, pioneers, in their late 30s. Okay, their late 30s. After that, it drops off drastically.
Yeah, didn't Einstein say something along the lines of, if you haven't made your great scientific contribution by the age of like 30, I think he said, you're unlikely to do it. Now the stats don't quite match that.
Don't quite match that,
but it's close.
It's close.
The great scientific discoveries that lead to later Nobel Prizes almost always happen before 40.
So air traffic controllers are pretty much mandated to retire when they hit the age of 56. If you're like a regular kind of like knowledge worker, someone who's a like white collar professional, chances are that your peak, your professional peak, will be somewhere between the late 30s to the early 50s. Okay. And after that, and this all comes back to our physiology.
So air traffic controllers, I'm imagining being because there's high risk safety involved. So you have to, it's a bit like elite sports people, like at 35, you have to stop playing because you'd be on your peak.
Yeah. And the risks are too great.
But this is a cognitive type of decline. Is that where that's coming from?
Yeah, that's where it's coming from. So risk, so if things go bad with an air traffic controller, they go really bad, really quick. And again, like the kind of work is so cognitively demanding. So that's what I want to get to, right? In terms of physiology, here's what seems to have happened. And this is all from a book that we've both read, From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks. Brooks talks about the two different types of intelligence. He says that the old kind of paradigm of just seeing, if you like, raw IQ is too simplistic. So based on a bunch of different research that he cites and that he studied, he describes the first kind of intelligence as fluid. And so this comes about through the development of our prefrontal cortex. And this is associated with things like executive functioning, like working memory, and the ability to be able to do like rapid analysis
Mm,
and
okay.
quick problem solving, yeah, as well, and to be able to take in like vast amounts of new information.
Yeah, so you can learn a bit
You can
faster.
learn really, really fast, yeah. So you can learn very, very quickly, and you can recall things quickly.
Okay.
And also, critically, there's a function that's associated with the prefrontal cortex, which is all about inhibiting our our ability to be distracted easily. So I can shut that down. I don't get so easily distracted.
Yeah, okay. So this is why when I was younger, I could study with music on,
Yeah,
or I could drive with music on and
yeah,
actually feel like it helped enhance my driving, for
yeah. That's
example.
right. Yeah, that's
But
right.
now actually I find too much noise
Yes.
is actually harder to
Yeah,
deal with
that's
because
right.
my brain has changed.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that the
That's
same
it.
kind of thing?
Yeah, yeah. So like
Okay.
pretty much we're talking about multitasking, and I
Yep.
know to some degree that's a complete fallacy in and of itself. There's no such thing. But our ability to be able to tolerate different stimuli at the same time decreases with age. When we're young, 20s again up to like late 30s, it's at a peak. So he gives like the awesome example, like you just did to some degree, of when I tell my kids, hey kids, like don't try to watch TV and listen to music at the same time and study. Don't do it because you can't multitask and
Yep.
you can't focus. Really, I can't multitask. I can't focus because I'm older.
You're waving a red rag to a bull because as a productivity consultant, I do need to clarify.
I know.
So you
But-
cannot wait a second, you cannot multitask,
Mhm.
meaning you can't have two attention-rich inputs at the same time. So you can sing in the shower, you can, I don't know, have a conversation while you're doing the dishes because one's a habitual task,
Mhm.
but you can't do a maths problem and think about something to do with your next project at the same time. So what you're doing is your brain is context switching like a metronome, left, right, left, right.
Yeah.
The only difference when you have fluid intelligence and you're younger is that flipping and that context switching doesn't seem to have as much cost. So you can look like you're doing these multiple things at the same time because it doesn't hurt your brain as much. So multitasking is never a good idea, but you can hide it longer when
Yes.
you're young. Just like you can hide eating sugar and not sleeping when you're young.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it
it's
doesn't
good.
seem to destroy your health,
Yeah.
even though it's never good for your health.
Yeah, yeah, okay.
I just want to clarify
No,
that.
it's good. I almost feel like we should have like a PSA announcement down the bottom of the screen here saying, yeah, just remember, kids, multitasking isn't a thing. It doesn't exist. Sorry, we're talking about rapid context switching.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
rapid
right.
context switching, not multitasking.
But it looks
It looks
like
as- yeah, yeah.
it looks like you can get away with rapid context switching,
Yes, yeah.
just like you can get away with sugar.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So when you're young, again, up to it seems like late 30s perhaps, and your prefrontal cortex is firing, you have this ability. It's almost like being your brain is a library,
Yep.
and your librarian is super fit, so they can take new books that get donated or whatever or bought by the library, they can file them super quickly. And then when it comes to pulling those books out, my librarian can quickly and nimbly go retrieve the book straight away and bring it back to me. So that's all great. But then again, for most of us, come the late 30s all the way through to the early 50s at latest, all of us suffer a degradation of our prefrontal cortex. So it does start to decline, if you like. It starts to drop off, right? So now, again, said librarian is a bit more creaky, okay? And what's happened is that the library over all this time has gotten stacked with books, books and books. So if you ask me, like, to, do something really simple, like recall, let's say who directed like the last Top Gun movie or something like that. Again, my librarian will be hobbling around, going through all these books, trying to retrieve the book all about Top Gun Maverick, okay, and bring it back, yeah? So what I used to be able to do with my fluid intelligence is now rapidly declining. And that's really frustrating. That's really scary. It means I literally can't keep up with my younger self. And if I like double down and just try, like, I don't know, like do a whole lot of Sudoku or something like that, right? I'm still not going to be able to somehow make up for that loss of what you can call fluid intelligence. That's the first sort. So that's the bad news. The good news is that this second intelligence seems to kind of kick into gear again when our first is on the decline. And again, Brooks like terms that based on his research and his studies of other people's studies, he calls that crystallized intelligence, okay, crystallized intelligence. And he gives like examples of usually as you get older, you actually get more articulate and increased vocab. That seems to go with older age and crystallized intelligence. And he points out that, again, there are some professions that lend themselves to flourishing later on in life, such as being a historian, as well as an applied mathematician. And so there seems to be, whilst again our fluid intelligence is on the decline, this second intelligence, crystallized intelligence, actually gives us more capacity for things like synthesizing all this information that we've collected over the years, and also interpreting what it is that we've learnt and collected, and then passing it on, communicating and conveying it.
So the benefit of the library is you actually have a lot more books.
Yeah.
You have a lot more
Yeah.
experience of life to draw from. So you might not be as sharp in reading a book and picking up the nuances straight away, but you can synthesize and collect and collate and crystallize
Yes.
all this experience.
Yeah.
And end up basically teaching, coaching,
Yeah.
creating,
Passing it on,
as
conveying
a
it.
result of it, which is probably closer to what the ancients would call wisdom.
Exactly.
While there's a disadvantage, it's not like sports. In sports, if you're an elite athlete, you eventually lose the ability to perform at that high level.
Yeah.
And then, maybe you become a coach or a trainer, you get to use other skills.
Yes.
But in terms of intelligence, yes, we lose our ability to create scientific discoveries that might lead to Nobel Prizes, but we increase our ability to write, coach, speak, train, manage, do a whole lot of other tasks.
And really critically, like going back to your sports analogy, you couldn't be that coach earlier in life when you were the player.
So how does that relate to productivity very specifically?
It means in terms of what we turn our attention to trying to achieve and do, I think particularly like in this midlife slump, as we've coined it, we want to work with our physiology and with this new kind of intelligence, if you like. So with our crystallized intelligence, we want to kind of focus our efforts in such a way that's consistent and conducive with that, rather than doubling down and just trying harder to kind of restart and rejig our fluid intelligence.
I'm showing my age, but I'm thinking of the old Rocky movie where, he lost the ability to actually win his bout by strength and muscle.
Yes, yeah.
And he had to actually get super smart and basically just wear the person down by using his right or his left. Like there's, in the sense of you start to work to your strengths and you start changing the way you work in order to get the benefits of who you are now. But that requires unlearning what you used to do.
Yeah.
And if we go back to the multitasking analogy, I can't believe I brought up Rocky. But as we go back to the multitasking analogy.
Yeah, rapid context switching.
Yeah, exactly. You absolutely in your midlife have to start taking digital distractions seriously if you want to have any meaningful outcome in terms of your career.
Yeah.
And I see this all the time in the people I work with. You have to turn off email alerts. You have to stop having Outlook on a second screen, having Teams open all the time and notifications. Otherwise, you literally will end up just going from one thing to the next thing to the next thing.
Yeah.
And your ability to perform will consistently decline and you'll feel like you're overwhelmed, stretched, busier and more reactive than ever before, but not necessarily achieving what matters. Like you fundamentally have to start saying no to a whole lot of small inputs in order to say yes to the one or two things that you can truly give your attention to, which are usually deep work, concentrated tasks. A good friend of yours and mine, a guy called Alan Hirsch, has said the same bit of advice to both of us.
Yeah.
That when we're young, like 20s and 30s, you spend your life trying to find out what puzzle pieces fit, grabbing different colored pieces and working out, are they part of my puzzle? Because you're trying to work out, what fits your strengths, what's in your passion set, what are you good at, what are you not good at. But in your latter part of life, it's about not doing that and putting the puzzle together. You actually synthesize it and consolidate it.
Yes. Yeah.
Create the picture, which is more about focus, saying no, creating boundaries and actually honing your attention in on how to actually make the puzzle work and how to leave a legacy rather than just grab different pieces. And that, again, is a good summary of what it takes, not only to shift careers, which is what we'll talk about in that episode, but also to change the way in which you live and work.
Yeah.
Okay, so Matt, we've talked about why you need basic systems to get things done when you're young and more complex systems when you're older. We've talked about fluid and crystallized intelligence and how that changes your opportunities as you go through the stages of life. Why don't we have a brief conversation about what do you have to unlearn? What does success look like from a productivity perspective when you're in the midlife slump? So why don't we start with crystallized intelligence? We've already talked about it a bit, but is there anything else you'd specifically say to someone in their 50s?
Yeah. Only I've got a friend who's between 40 and 50, and their first career had involved a lot of people kind of oriented and facing work, and they really liked that. But then they made this big shift again in their midlife slump kind of age, so like in their 40s, and got involved in the health, like doing frontline health work. And I remember they told me when they first couple of weeks on the job, and they were side by side with all these really much younger peers, again, been all through the same training pathway, had the same level of education now, first day, like on the actual job. And his peers were just picking up all this information really quickly, being able to recall it, take it in, and then spit it back out.
So it was nursing, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so my friend is there thinking, wow, I just can't keep up with these people, my peers, my much younger colleagues, in terms of, again, information coming in
Okay.
and being able to spit it back out. And that thing, I can't even keep up like with the younger version of me. I would have been so much better at this like 10 years ago. But later on, when it came to the actual like personal patient care, my friend had all this experience and accumulated wisdom because of their past career to be able to draw on, put together, and synthesize. Yeah.
So I imagine he could lead and manage very quickly.
Yeah, that's right.
Because of
Yeah,
all of his life
exactly. Yeah,
experience.
and tend to people so well and so quickly.
Yes, a good example. Okay, so if you are in that midlife slump and you're feeling dissatisfied and thinking about how do I either reboot my career or change the way in which I work, start to think about how can I move towards coaching, managing, synthesizing, using my skills and experience to provide added value or deep work, as opposed to how can I work harder and align your roles where possible with your new formed level of intelligence.
Yes, that's right.
So that's the first thing. The second thing we talked about is systems.
Yes.
And this is where, the bread and butter of what I do is train and coach and work with senior leaders and professionals who are trying to work out how do I get space in my life, because they find themselves, having been successful through their 20s and 30s, established near the top of their various careers or professions, and absolutely smashed for time, struggling to get any concentrated time, wrestling with multitasking and just having distraction after distraction, interruption after interruption, and they just don't know what to do about it. So this is that unlearning that needs to happen in order to thrive as a senior leader later in life. And so I've traditionally talked about 4 foundational ideas when it comes to the basis of productivity. We talked about even in your 20s, I think you need these 4 ideas, but I add a 5th when it comes to the midlife slump. So the 4 would be, we used to call the COPE habits: capture, organize, plan, and execute. So you have to have a capture tool when it comes to your productivity system. And by that, rather than keeping everything in your head, an email comes in, you self-generate an idea, someone has a conversation with you in a meeting and says, can you do this? You don't want to walk around with it all in your head, even if you have fluid intelligence. It's just a dumb idea, because your working memory should be used for other things. And so you need a way of capturing those inputs in a particular place or a few places, so that you can outsource your memory and increase your capacity to deal with stuff. So that's the same for everyone. Capture, organize is the idea that you do not want a single level list. You don't want a task list. Otherwise, you'll end up just doing lots of small stuff. What you need is a 2-level list where you have key projects that have significance, so the kind of strategic goals you want to achieve, and then the next 1 or 2 very clear actions related to them. So a list with projects and tasks. That's again for everyone, so that you can achieve the things that matter most day by day. So number 3 is plan, or multi-level planning. So you basically need to plan your year, your week, your day, rather than just turn up and see what's in email and see what happens in your calendar in terms of meetings and let that shape your day. Particularly, what are your goals? How do you have a weekly plan? And how do you time block the stuff in your calendar that matters? That's not simple, but it's super foundational, and there are lightweight ways of doing that. And the last one is execute. When you're actually in the moment, you've got an hour of free time and you want to achieve a particular task. How do you do it rather than procrastinate? Strategies you might have heard of, like Eat the Frog or Pomodoro. There's lots of strategies, and that would include processing your inbox to 0 using our Email Ninja methodologies.
Can I multitask?
If you want to pretend to multitask, Matt, you can at any age. But those things are foundational for anyone at any age. They're the kind of the core foundational aspects of what it means to have a productivity system, and they need to integrate together. But I spend most of my time in, let's say, masterclass, or a significant amount of time talking about the last one, which I say are the COPE habits. And R is about reduce, because the biggest problem that leaders face is that they just have too many commitments. You can organize the heck out of yourself and have all the right efficiency systems in place, but if you have 120% or 130% commitment overload, it doesn't matter what system you have, you won't be productive. You won't be able to achieve things that actually matter. And by productivity, I never mean getting more done, and I never mean being efficient. What I mean is knowing what truly matters in your life and forming habits and practices to intentionally live that life in a sustainable way. That's what I mean by productivity. So essentially, when we hit our 40s, 50s, and we're in highly kind of responsible roles, you have to spend a whole lot of time reducing commitments. And that takes a lot of practice to say no to a whole lot of stuff, which involves not just eliminating and subtracting responsibilities, which I think is very, very important, or even automating using technology so you're out of the picture.
So it's not as simple as just say no.
No,
No.
it's not as simple
Yeah.
as saying no, but it is as simple as saying the way to thrive and to be truly productive in your midlife is to do fewer things in a very focused, efficient way. And that requires a fundamental shift in how you work. I mean, have you seen that with people you've worked with?
Oh, yeah, certainly. And I've seen it in my own life. If you've done okay and if you've been fortunate, then I think what makes it even trickier is that a lot of the stuff that you have to say no to are going to be really good opportunities, really worthy causes, like things that in a perfect world you would have the space for. You could do it all. And that's what makes it really, really difficult.
Yeah, that's a great point, Matt. It's super helpful to put boundaries down and know how to say no for a greater yes. So we have an ebook and actually an audiobook called How to Say No for a Greater Yes. We put it together because people wrestle, like ourselves, with how to say no. So both the science of no, the skills of saying no in a professional way, and also why no is emotional work and how to kind of change your mindset to allow you to set healthier self-care boundaries. So if you're interested, it's all free. Go to spacemakers.au/no. That's spacemakers.au/no. You'll get the free book and a free audiobook narrated by yours truly, if you want to hear more of my voice. But it's just 1 hour and it will be super helpful.
Cool. Nice.
Look, and if you get stuck, I do have a YouTube channel and I've got a number of videos about like 7 strategies to say no like a pro, because I think it often requires strategies. But the biggest thing I think people need is a mindset shift, that actually it will be painful and it will be emotionally hard to say no. Setting a healthy, intentional course to your life in a mature way as a professional, that requires the acceptance that setting boundaries and saying no is emotional. And it requires a lot of maturity, but going through the emotional pain of it is part of adulthood, particularly part of the later life. And once you embrace that idea, we need to do it anyway because it's about our life goals and about a meaningful, purposeful existence rather than something that makes me feel good. So again, I've put a lot of stuff into my resources if you're interested. No.
Yeah, so before we take our standard 30-second pause, chance to reflect, this quote from James Clear, who we talked about a lot, great author, and has a lot of really useful stuff to say in this space. He writes, when you say no, you are only saying no to one option. When you say yes, you are saying no to every other option. No is a decision. Yes is a responsibility. Be careful what and who you say yes to. It will shape your day, your career, your family, your life. So we've had 30 seconds of silence, pondering the wisdom of James Clear.
And hopefully you and I to a
And
point.
hopefully you and I to a point. Yeah, that's right. It is hard to say no to people. It's not going to make you feel very happy. But if you're already like in your midlife slump, you already feel unhappy. So just embrace it. But as usual, we want to make it really practical and really concrete too. So we've got our 2 exercises for our viewers/listeners. One for those of you who are in your 20s and 30s, and one for those of you who are in your 40s and 50s. So the first one, if you're in your 20s and 30s. Again, this is all about, if you like, and we've used this analogy before, this picture before, building your container. So on that, we'd like you to say yes to something this week, between this show and the next, that involves, and we're going to be very specific about this, sensible risk. Okay, so sensible risk. So that could be something like that involves, say, like new relationships, maybe like learning a new skill. Critically, we want it to be something that gets you out of your immediate comfort zone. Okay, so like you could say it's an appropriate, suitable stretch. If you're in your 40s, your 50s, again, like chances are, as we've already discussed, if you're like us, and you probably are, you're already feeling overloaded and far too stretched. So we'd like you to say no, again, appropriately, appropriately, to as many things as possible this week. Again, so This is also going to be a stretch, but it'll be a stretch in the other sense in that it may cost you emotionally. It's probably going to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. Yeah. And that's because, you care about yourself, you care about other people. But again, think about saying no for the greater yes, which is your own self-care and probably the care of the people who are closest and dearest to you as well. And again, we'd strongly encourage you jump on the YouTube channel.
Yeah. And also download the ebook, because there's also a handout there.
Yes.
Look, again, I've coached a lot of people in this space, and the no's are fascinating. Someone said no in one of my masterclass groups, no to a bit more work on a weekend, and they booked in a caravan trip, like I think every 4 weeks or something, just on the weekend, but they weren't getting away. So that was their no.
There you go.
Others have said no to bigger things. They've been asked to take on projects or new responsibilities, and they've actually found a way of saying no. And they've often come back and said, hey, I'm surprised that I got away with it. Like when I actually said no and gave my reasons, it was like, okay. Or it might be just no to smaller stuff, but it's still, like you said, has to be a little bit of a risk. But it's very relieving to make a bit more space in your life. And the last thing I'd say is in Masterclass, we have a 30-day no challenge where we compete with each other to say no to as many things as possible. I've got that handout if you're interested as well as part of that sign up.
Yeah, that's cool.
So to summarize, if you're younger, say yes to something risky and do it this week. Think about what you'll do, when you do it, and actually create that action trigger. Commit to something today. If you're older and you feel overwhelmed and you've already got a lot of opportunities in life, take the risk and say no to something, even if that means delegating, outsourcing, eliminating, automating. It could be a strategy to help you get there. And if you really want to dive deep into this, download my ebook and audiobook at spacemakers.au/no. But next week, we're going to dive into friendship. And we're going to deepen the conversation about why friendship is important, how to go about building meaningful networks when you're younger, and how to regain, I suppose, a minimal viable product of meaningful friendships even when you're stretched for time as you get older.
Yeah, that's right. Working on our social fitness.
Social fitness based on the research. I'm really looking forward to this. And until next time, make space.
See you, everyone.